So far, I think I learned a lot, which I had no clue about. So to begin with, Finland, I think, is the 7th largest country in Europe, and the name for Finland in Finnish is actually Suomi. So far, I think I learned a lot, which I had no clue about. Turns out Finland had a very interesting story in the history. And yeah, for example, 12th century to 1809, they were part of Sweden, so they didn't have identity. And then from 1809 to 1917, they were part of the Russian or the Soviet. And then Russia. And then they became an independent country, and then they have this democratic way of living. So no history of kings and duchess and those part. And this language Finnish is also very different from the rest of the Scandinavian languages. So in Finland, they have two official languages. First is Finnish, the second is Swedish. So Swedish because previously also culturally they were part of Sweden, and also like people still speak Swedish as a second language, mostly in the region bordering Sweden. So Finland, Sweden, Norway. So Sweden is kind of between Norway and Finland and shares a very long border. Similarly, Russia shares a really long border with Finland. So it's like almost 1,300 kilometers of border between Russia and Finland. And it's marked border. So there are towns, small towns around the border coast where you cannot go to the border unless you're a resident of that place. So Yarko was telling me that few weeks ago there was an incident where there were 3 French men who just for fun thought, we will cross the border because anyways there is no border control as such, because it was like maybe through forest or something like that. They went to cross the border, just jump across and come back. And by the time they came back to the Finnish side again, the border control had arrived, and they explained that it's a crime to cross not just the country border, you cross the Schengen border as well as European Union border. And it's a major crime, so they were arrested for that, which is very strong considering the current time that you have. Like, yeah, can't have that kind of joke. But I will read about it, what happened to those men. So yeah, they share a massive border with Sweden on the west side and Russia on the east side, and on the south they have a sea, and in the north they have a kind of a border in the Lapland zone with Norway as well. So that's basically how it looks like, more or less. That's a small piece of information. If I gave any incorrect information, I'm sorry. I hope I did not give any incorrect information, but this is what I learned. I was very fascinated to understand, okay, the country I know so little about also has a very fascinating background story of it. So yesterday I had a very intense conversation with Yarko, my host from Couchsurfing, about Finland, and I learned a lot about the history of Finland, and it's quite fascinating, which I feel ashamed that I didn't know much about. So to begin with, Finland, I think, is the 7th largest country in Europe. It's bigger than Norway, but still smaller than Sweden, and I think 9th biggest is Poland. And the name for Finland in Finnish is actually Suomi. So Suomi is the name of the country, just like Bharat is the name of India. So in Hindi we call it Bharat. Like Bharat Sarkar is like Indian government. Similarly, the Finnish call their country Suomi, and Suomi comes from this word Sauma, I think, which means swampland, which explains because they have like 180,000 lakes all over the country, and some of the region looks like almost that you're driving through water around land a bit. Like right now next to me is also a massive lake. So yeah, it's just filled with lakes, and the capital being Helsinki. So the majority of the population, which is 5.5 million total population, majority of it lives in the southern part of Finland. So it's very long country. I think could be almost 1,500, maybe a bit more, from north to south. But it's not very wide, and also because of so much water, the land area is less, despite it looks pretty big. So Finland has a very interesting history. So Finland never had a king or a duke. They were previously part of Sweden from, let's say, 12th century to 1809, which means for these number of years they were sharing the king, or maybe they were basically part of Sweden, so they were the Swedish Empire, and they got freed from Sweden in 1809 and took over by Russia from 1809 to 1917. But during this period they got their identity as Finland, and they had their own autonomous let's say what's the word, like they had their own way of conducting their government, business, everything, laws. They had their own. And then when this changed in 1917, when they declared independence and became Finland. So from 1809 to 1917 they were still part of the Russian side, but they became Finland from 1917. So the Independence Day of Finland is 6th December 1917. It's also very fascinating, I didn't know. And during the World War they had a very interesting situation. So once it started in Poland, the World War started in Poland, Nazis attacked Poland. The Russia attacked in November of 1939 in Finland, and they started this war which is called as the Winter War. So it lasted like 3 months because it was in the peak winter, and they were just fighting through this winter period. And then they in 1940 they had kind of a peace treaty, and they decided, okay, we will not do this anymore, and Finland lost a bit of land during this period, almost 10% of it. But Russia also lost a lot of soldiers. Then they stayed at this peace status for a while, but again, I think in 1942 or 43, Russia attacked again, because they had this feeling of like kind of embarrassment that they couldn't win against Finland, and they attacked again. And this war also lasted for a while, and during this war I think they had the world's best sniper score was by a Finnish guy. I think his name I forgot, and he was called the White Death. The title of this guy was the White Death because he had the maximum kills, and he would just hide and stay low and just kill Russian soldiers. During the same period of time, I think the allyship between Nazis and the Russians broke, and the Nazis offered a support to Finland to fight them. So basically Finland took support from the Nazis and decided that, okay, if you fight for us, we are not going to become part of the German Empire, okay? And they had this deal, okay, they went to the northmost part, which is called Lapland of Finland, and Nazis were taking care of that 200-300 kilometers of that border, and the rest of it was fought by the Finnish soldiers. And it lasted till 1944, and that's when Russia decided to stop the war and call for another peace treaty, because Russia had lost almost 250,000 soldiers, while Finland had lost 25,000 soldiers and many wounded. So it was a loss on either side, so they kind of decided to stay on peace terms. But the Russia forced Finland to pay reparations for the loss and for the damages. So they took over all the industries, all the, let's say, the shipping industries or the iron industries, and they took over all the land where they were kind of in the southeast part of Finland. They took that land also with them, where they were kind of developing the industrialization in Finland. So basically, the end of World War II, Finland was one of the poorest country in Europe. And from there, they started to build the country again from scratch. And the people worked hard, of course. They started to develop new industries. But because they started to develop from scratch, they were able to adapt better technological advancement compared to the rest of the world. So they developed really fast. And they developed so fast that this today is like one of the richest economies, and like this happiness index matters. They have this like 6th position, sometimes 2nd, 3rd position of the happiness index in the world, which is great. Like to see how it transformed completely. And still, the country's majority of the country land is just forest and like barren. And they used to also have some tribes called Sami tribes in the north part, which is called Lapland. So Lapland is basically a region. You can think of it as Himalaya. So it's a chain of mountains which spans across different countries. Let's say from Pakistan, India, Nepal, even in China, I think they have. Similarly, Lapland goes from Russia, Finland, Norway, Sweden. And this region used to have their own tribe called Sami tribe, which still exists in this region. There's like the indigenous people living there. So that part is like the least inhabited part in Finland. And it's like really north. Like from my location, I'm almost 1/3 of or 1/4 of from the southmost tip. And still it would be like more than 1,000 kilometers straight drive for me to reach Lapland or the north.